Alright, it's that time again. I owe you a demo for April. Okay, the first thing that you may notice if you've been following along is the addition of these large thumbnails up here. And this is what I call the roadmap. So it neatly divides the entire workflow into 5 distinct steps. Now, these have already been present in the videos I've been demonstrating, but I've been jumping around in the UI, and probably to someone who hasn't, been actually programming this thing, it's maybe not obvious what I'm doing or the way I'm traversing these 5 different stages of the workflow. Now, each of these steps, the UI will change depending on what we're doing. But to keep track of where you are and what you're trying to do at the current step, you just keep an eye on this roadmap. So let me demonstrate how this works. So obviously we begin at the design step, and I've done this many times in my videos, just actually edit, create my design. When I'm ready, I just say confirm design. And notice now that an arrow starts flashing in the roadmap, indicating that we can proceed to the next step. So now that we have an input pitch curve, I'm going to go to step 2. Step 2 is where we add the mating pitch curves, and in this case we can just do it with the click of a button if we want to. And I've also demonstrated this in many of my videos. You can do things like toggle visibility, etc. And when you're happy with what pitch curves you've chosen, you can choose more than one, but I'll just have one additional pitch curve for this demonstration. Confirm, and once again you see the arrow flashing indicating that we're ready to go to the next step. So I'll go ahead there. And I could, if I wanted, here, now that we're at the compute involutes step, which is step 3, I could go in here, I could select these gears and start modifying some of the parameters and some of the tooth variable parameter curves, but I'll just leave it at the defaults for now, and I'll just say Gearify. And once again, after it gearifies, after it computes the teeth, you see the next arrow is flashing because we've effectively finished computing involutes. We could modify them if we wanted, but as long as you've computed them once, you're ready to proceed to the next step if you're happy with it. Otherwise, you could just change the parameters and say Gearify again, and then also proceed. Notice that in this step, you have the tooth intersections, but we've talked about that in previous videos. That's what the tooth trimming takes care of, and that is step 4. So I can just say begin trim, and this is handling all of the tooth intersections by forcing the tooth tips to recede wherever they intersect, and we're already done. I made it default to the fastest one because that's good for just testing and prototyping. You probably would use the slower trimming if you were actually planning to export and manufacture your result. Okay, so once again the next arrow is flashing, and now we've made it all the way to the export step, and we could control for what details we want rendered, and then actually do the export of the DXF file, and that's it. That's very quickly all 5 steps of the workflow. You can also go back at any time to the previous step. Going back does lose your current progress. So for instance, I have the involutes computed. If I go back and then click next, you've lost the involutes. Likewise, if I go back to the add mating curves step, now I generated this second curve here. So if I go back and click next, it always resets to the beginning. So when you step forward, it basically, you know, resets from the start of that step. But you can always just go back from where you are, and your previous progress will always be saved, just not the current step. The current step will always be thrown away. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is these help captions that I've been working on in the corner. These are intended more for beginners or people who are still getting the hang of the software, so that they always have some guidance in terms of what they're supposed to do next or what they can do next. So just to show you an example, here we are again at the trim tooth peaks step 4, and it's telling me to begin trim when ready. And once I click to begin trim, it tells me that the trimming is in progress and to please wait for it to finish, and also lets me know I can adjust the trim accuracy for faster or slower completion in the meantime, which are these options. I'm just going to set it back to fast so that it finishes. And then now it's letting me know that the trimming is completed and that I can proceed to the next step, which would be here, or I can go back. This would go back to the actual before the trimming occurred, and then of course I could go back to the previous step if I wanted to. So these are to hopefully guide you at any step of the way, so you never get lost or never have no idea what to do. I will add a toggle option at some point to uh, hide that after you are, after you know your way around the software, and then that those help captions cannot clutter your view. Because in some cases there's a lot of instructions, like in this case in particular, especially if you're dealing with a smaller, maybe you have a smaller resolution or a smaller window that you're dealing with. It can clutter it. It won't block your view, but it still can get in the way a bit. Rather, it won't block the interaction, I meant to say. But they'll be toggleable, so you can get them out of your way once you're finished with them. So, but I hope that'll make the software a lot more approachable, especially for newbies. Another thing I did since last month was to reshuffle and adjust the UI a bit so that it can handle smaller screen resolutions. Before, it would only handle 1080p well. Any smaller than that, you started running into issues with parts of the UI clipping off the ends of the window. Um, this control in particular was one that was eating up a lot of screen real estate, so I put in a scroll bar. So you still have the most likely gears that you're going to add, um, but the others are down there as well. And just a lot of general reshuffling to make sure that if you don't have a very high resolution monitor, that it will still work for your setup. Here I have the minimum screen resolution that's supported. If your monitor cannot handle this, do yourself a favor and get a new monitor, because I think this is pretty reasonable. So the exciting bit of news is that I am now primarily focused on deploying an alpha release so I can get some of my users testing the software, figuring out any significant bugs that exist, and then moving on to a beta release where we can get a larger pool of users actually having access to the software. So to do this, I'm working on splitting up the software into a client server model. Effectively, what you will download and install is the Gearify client, and that will communicate with the server and sort of a way of protecting my software from theft. And this is actually already pretty far along. I've already started working on this, and compared to the difficulty of what I've already implemented, it's snapping into place quite rapidly. So I'm very excited and optimistic that this is going to pan out without too much time going by. And yeah, I'm really excited. This is very close to having something that I can give out and begin testing with actual users. Okay, so the good news is that I can finally state definitively that this time next month, I will have the software in the hands of at least a few hand-picked alpha users. So alpha is finally on its way. I will be doing a little bit of additional polish, of course, because alpha means it's not ready, but I can get that server stood up and get the authentication set up, and if I can be more confident after a little bit of testing that the software is stable and doing what it's supposed to, then I can open it up to a wider pool of users. So things are really looking up at this point. So all right, that's about it for this month. We'll check in next month, and hopefully we'll be getting the software out to you very soon. Thank you.